They were selling horses, boots, and bullets that day in Dustwood, same as any other Saturday. But what stopped Jed Halley in his tracks wasn't the gun rack or the whiskey barrels. It was a boy, small, hunched, standing barefoot near the water trough with a burlap sack tied over his head like a grain sack, 2 holes crudely cut for eyes. He didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't flinch when folks walked past. Jed had seen a lot of strange things in his 40-some years riding the edge of civilization. But this didn't sit right. A trader with tobacco-stained teeth caught Jed staring. "Yours for $1, he chuckled, jerking a thumb at the boy. "Can't talk, don't bite. Good for chores if you don't mind the silence." Jed's first instinct was to walk away. He didn't need trouble. He didn't need the ache that came with caring. Not again. But the boy's thin arms and trembling knees held him still. Like some piece of his past had stood up and taken shape in front of him. Jed reached into his coat, pulled out a crumpled bill, his last $1, truth be told, and handed it over. The trader laughed, clapped Jed on the back, and disappeared into the crowd without another word. Jed bent down, loosening the twine from around the boy's neck. The boy flinched, then stilled. Jed pulled the sack off slowly. The child's hair was matted, eyes wide and frightened, face pale under the dirt. He said nothing, just looked up at Jed like he was waiting to be hit or left behind. Jed knelt. "What's your name, son?" Silence. Jed sighed. "Well, I reckon we'll figure that out." He didn't know what he'd just taken on, only that something in that boy's eyes said, "Don't leave me," and something in Yet's heart, long buried under years of loneliness and guilt, whispered back, "I won't." They rode out of Dustwood in the fading light, the boy holding tight to Yet's coat from behind, silent as dusk. Jed didn't ask where he came from, not yet. He figured the land had its way of revealing things when it was ready. But that night, while the boy slept curled by the hearth in Yet's one-room cabin, something fell from the folds of his shirt. A folded scrap of paper, yellowed at the edges, smudged with dirt. Jed unfolded it, heart thumping without reason. It was a letter, written in shaky, delicate script. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Please protect him. He's not what he seems." There was no name, no date, just that one plea. Jed looked over at the boy face, soft in sleep, fists clenched, a scar running just beneath his jaw. He read the letter again. "He's not what he seems." What would you do if you found a letter like that folded inside the shirt of a child who couldn't speak? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The fire burned low that morning, sending flickers across the cabin's rough-hewn walls. Jed stirred the embers, then glanced at the boy still asleep near the hearth. His chest rose and fell steady, but his hands were clenched tight against his chest, like he was bracing for something even in sleep. Jed poured a mug of coffee, sat at the table, and stared at the letter again. He's not what he seems. He didn't know what that meant, and truthfully, he wasn't sure he wanted to. But the boy was under his roof now. That made him Jed's responsibility, whether for a night or the rest of his days. When the boy finally woke, he didn't speak, didn't stretch, just sat up, eyes scanning the room like a caged animal checking for a way out. Jed crouched beside him. "You hungry?" The boy gave a small nod. Jed tore off a piece of cornbread, slid over a cup of milk, and waited. The boy didn't eat fast. He didn't eat like a child at all. He ate like someone who'd learned not to expect the next meal. "You got a name?" Jed asked again. The boy looked at him, lips parting slightly. Then he pressed his hand to his throat and shook his head. Jed sighed. "All right. No name, no voice. I'll call you Ash, for now. That all right?" Ash blinked. A flicker of something passed across his face. Relief, maybe even approval. Jed couldn't tell for sure. The rest of the day passed quiet. Jed chopped wood while Ash sat on the porch, legs swinging off the edge. He didn't ask to help, but he watched, closely, like he'd never seen someone split logs before. Or maybe like he'd seen it done too many times the wrong way. That night, as the wind picked up and clouds moved low over the mountains, Jed pulled the letter from the mantel one more time. He turned it over. Nothing on the back, but just as he moved to put it away, something caught his eye, a faint crease in the paper. A second fold he hadn't noticed before. Carefully, he opened the hidden flap. There, almost too faded to read, were 5 more words. "Don't let them find him." Yet's breath caught. He turned toward the boy, now curled on the cot, face half in shadow. "Who's them?" he muttered under his breath. But Ash didn't stir, didn't speak. didn't blink. That night, Jed locked the cabin door, not because of fear, but because, for the first time in a long time, he felt like something precious was inside. And maybe, just maybe, something dangerous was out there. The wind brought snow the next morning, fine, dry flakes that hissed against the windows like whispered warnings. Jed stood with a mug of coffee by the stove, watching Ash draw lines in the frost on the glass. The boy's breath left soft clouds. He hadn't spoken a word since arriving, and Jed had stopped expecting it. He had questions, sure, but there was something sacred about Ash's silence, like breaking it would shatter, something delicate neither of them could repair. Then came the knock. 3 slow raps, not urgent, not fearful, just deliberate. Jed's hand went to the rifle by the door before he even realized it. Ash froze. His shoulders stiffened like stone, fingers curling under the WINDOWSILL. Jed opened the door a crack. A woman stood on the step, wrapped in a heavy grey wool cloak, speckled with snow. She was older, maybe late 40s, but carried herself like someone used to walking through storms without asking permission. Her eyes, pale blue, cut through the cold like ice on a blade. "I'm looking for a boy," she said. Jed didn't answer. She tilted her head, small, mute. "Wears a sack sometimes. You've seen him." Jed stepped outside and shut the door behind him. "Who's asking?" The woman clasped her gloved hands together. "Someone who knows what he is, and what he's capable of." Jed narrowed his eyes. "He's just a kid." She smiled, faint and sad. "No child is just anything, Mr. Halley." Jed stiffened. "You know my name." "I know more than your name," she said softly. "I know you fought at Calico Ridge. I know you lost a brother there, and I know you've been trying to disappear ever since." He said nothing. The woman stepped closer. "That boy is not yours. And the people who lost Himlets just say they don't take kindly to their property running off." Yet's jaw tightened. "He ain't property." Her face twitched almost pitying. "Then you're more naive than I thought." She turned to leave, then paused. Over her shoulder, she asked, "Did he speak to you?" Jed hesitated. The wind howled. The snow thickened. "No," he said, "he hasn't." She nodded slowly, like that confirmed something. "Good, keep it that way." And with that, she vanished down the trail, her boots leaving no sound, like the snow had swallowed her whole. Jed stood there a long time after. Then he went inside and bolted the door. Ash looked up at him, eyes questioning. Jed knelt, rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said quietly. "But I ain't letting anyone take you. Not unless I'm dead first." Ash's eyes welled with something, fear, maybe, or gratitude, or something in between. He reached out, slow, and touched Jed's wrist. Then, for the first time, he nodded. That night, Jed didn't sleep. The fire crackled low. Ash stayed curled in the corner, blanket pulled tight, and somewhere in the dark, Jed whispered, not expecting a reply, "What are you, kid? And why are they so afraid of your voice?" 3 days passed since the woman in grey disappeared into the snow, but her words lingered like wood smoke on Yet's coat. "He's not yours. Don't let him speak." Each night the wind scraped harder against the cabin walls, and each morning Jed checked the trail for footprints that weren't his own. Ash didn't ask questions. He didn't point, or draw pictures, or even hum. But something in his silence had changed. It was heavier now, like it was holding something back instead of just holding him together. One evening, while Ash slept and the fire settled into slow-burning coals, Jed noticed something odd on the wall behind the stove. A slat of wood had warped slightly, just enough to reveal a seam that didn't belong. He set down his mug, pulled the stove gently aside, and pried at the panel with the edge of a dull knife. It gave way. Behind it, wrapped in a faded green cloth, was a small wooden box, one Jed had never seen before. It looked old, hand-carved, but not by frontier hands. The lid bore a strange symbol, a circle with jagged lines bursting from the center, like a sun or an explosion. Inside the box, a brooch, tarnished silver, shaped like a bird with its wings tucked in, and beneath that, a folded scrap of parchment. Jed opened it carefully. He remembers more than they want. If he dreams, listen. If he draws, look closer. If he speaks, run. No signature, no date. But the handwriting matched the first letter found in Ash's pocket. Jed closed the box and looked over at the boy, now stirring under his blanket. A dream was pulling at him. Jed could see it, in the twitch of his hands, the quickening breath. Ash jerked once, then twice. and then he gasped, eyes flying open. Jed was beside him in an instant. "It's all right, you're safe." Ash blinked hard. He sat up slowly, then reached toward the ash pile beside the hearth. With one finger, he began to draw a circle, jagged lines, the same symbol from the box. Jed's voice was low, rough. "You've seen that before?" Ash nodded once. Then so slow it was almost imperceptible, he raised his hand and touched his throat, then the air, then pointed to Yet's chest. "Me?" Jed asked. Ash nodded again. Jed swallowed. "You're saying I was there?" Ash didn't answer. He just looked down at the symbol again. And now Jed realized something chilling. He had seen that symbol before, not in town, not in any book, but carved into a tree deep in the foothills. 15 years ago, the night his brother disappeared. The next morning, Jed saddled his horse and packed extra food. Ash watched him with wide eyes. "We're going somewhere," Jed said. "Somewhere only I remember. You're coming with me." Ash hesitated, then walked forward, took Yet's hand, and held on. The trail wound narrow through the foothills, past frozen creeks and cliffs scarred by time. Jed hadn't ridden this path in over a decade and, for good reason. It was the last place his brother had ever been seen. Ash rode behind him, arms tight around Jed's waist. He hadn't made a sound the entire morning, just breathed slow and deep. Like every tree they passed, whispered something only he could hear. By mid-afternoon they reached it, a grove of black pines, older than any town nearby. The air here smelled like old storms and secrets. Jed dismounted. Slowly. "This is where it happened," he murmured. "Last camp we made before Wade disappeared." Ash slid off the horse and stood still, his boots sinking into the soft pine needles. He walked ahead a few steps, then knelt touching the earth like he knew something had once been buried there. Jed watched in silence. After a few minutes, Ash stood and pointed to a tree, one twisted and marked with a faint carving, the same sunburst symbol from the box. Jed approached it, his hand tracing the lines. He remembered that night like a wound. Wade had gone off to piss and never come back. Some said he got lost in a storm. Others said bandits. Jed never believed either, and now, looking at Ash, he wasn't so sure it had been chance at all. Ash stepped back and took a stick from the ground. In the dirt, he drew again, the symbol, then 2 figures, one tall, one small. Then he added a third, a shadow. Jed's voice cracked. "You saw this?" Ash nodded slowly. Jed sank to his knees beside the drawing. "That third one. It took my brother." Ash looked away. Then, almost trembling, he reached for his shirt collar and pulled it down. Across his shoulder, half hidden beneath cloth and time, was a mark, the same symbol, burned in Yet's hands, curled into fists. He looked at Ash, like seeing him for the first time, and suddenly it hit him, not just fear, but shame. Because this wasn't about Wade anymore. This was about something older. A chain of people taken, changed, silenced, maybe by force, maybe by something worse. And the boy he'd bought for $1, he might have escaped it, or he might be what escaped. That night, they made camp in the clearing. Jed kept the fire small. The rifle closed, but he never pointed it at Ash. He COULDN, single quotes D. Instead, as the boy curled near the embers, Jed whispered into the dark, "Whatever they did to you, I'm sorry. You're not what they wanted you to be, are you?" Ash didn't speak, but just before sleep took him, he reached out and laid his small hand over Jed's, and in that silence, louder than any scream, Jed understood. This boy wasn't dangerous. He was running from danger, and now, so was Jed. What would you do if protecting someone meant questioning the truth you've believed for years? Would you go back to the place where your heart first broke, just to keep another heart from breaking too? Tell me below. It happened just before dawn. Jed had dozed off beside the fire, one hand resting near the rifle, the other curled loosely around Ash's blanket. The boy hadn't stirred all night, and, till now, Ash sat bolt upright, his body stiff, face frozen in a look Jed hadn't seen before. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. Jed was instantly awake. "What is it?" Ash didn't answer. Instead, he raised one hand shaking and pointed toward the trees. Then came the sound. It wasn't loud, not at first. Just a soft metallic click, like something winding, deliberate, unnatural. Then, a second sound. A whistle, not birdsong, a signal. Jed grabbed the rifle, pulling Ash behind him. "We need to move." But Ash stayed frozen, eyes locked on a distant spot beyond the black pines. Jed followed his gaze, saw it, a glint of glass catching early sunlight. Not a hunter, not an animal, a scope dot. Someone was watching them. Jed yanked the saddlebags onto his shoulder, on the horse now. They rode hard, the air sharp with frost, trees blurring past like ghostly sentinels. Ash clung to Jed, tighter than ever. And, for the first time since they'd met, Jed felt him shake. Not from cold, from memory. They reached a narrow ravine near Red Hollow by late morning. Jed pulled the horse into the shadows beneath a rocky outcrop and dismounted, scanning the ridgeline. Ash slid down slowly. He didn't cry, didn't tremble anymore. But when Jed turned toward him, he saw it. Tears, silent and still. And then, Ash opened his mouth and made a sound. Not a word, not even a name. Just a tiny broken hum. A tune, a melody with only 3 notes. But it was enough. Jed felt it in his chest like thunder cracking across old bones. Because that same tune, those same 3 notes, had been whistled by his brother Wade. The night he disappeared, Jed's legs went weak. He dropped to one knee in front of Ash. You were there." Ash nodded. Jed's single quotes as voice broke. "And you tried to warn him, didn't you?" Ash looked down. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket hand, pulled out a folded piece of paper Jed had never seen before. It was older, frayed, burned slightly. Along one edge, he handed it over. Jed unfolded it, hands trembling. The writing was Wade's. "If they come for me, don't follow. Protect the boy. He remembers everything they want forgotten." Jed stared at the page, breath ragged. His brother hadn't just vanished. He'd given his life to protect someone else, Ash. And somehow, that mute child had carried the weight of it, ever since, alone, unspoken, unseen, until now. That night, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. Ash leaned against Jed's shoulder as they watched the fire burn low, and the melody he'd hummed played again in the silence, this time not as a warning, but as a memory held between them. And somewhere, deep in the forest, the watchers waited, but Jed was done running. By the third day, Jed had memorized the rhythms of the woods, the crack of a branch, the call of a hawk, the silence before something unnatural entered the clearing. That morning, there were no birds, no wind, just stillness. Ash felt it too. He stood rigid by the campfire, clutching the brooch they'd found back at the cabin, the one shaped like a bird with its wings tucked in. His fingers wouldn't let it go. Then they came, not from the trees, but from the trail behind. 3 men, not bandits, not bounty hunters. They wore dustless gray coats, crisp at the seams. No guns, no bags, just long, perfect coats that didn't belong on any trail Jed had ever seen. Their boots didn't make sound when they walked, and their eyes didn't blink enough. The one in front, tall, with graying hair and hands that looked too clean, smiled. "Mr. Halley," he said, like greeting an old friend. "You've been caring for something that doesn't belong to you." Jed stepped between Ash and the men. "He ain't a thing, and he belongs right where he is." The man raised his hands peacefully. "I don't want trouble, truly. We're caretakers, stewards, you might say. That boy, he was entrusted to us." Jed scoffed. "That why he was sold in a sack? That's your idea of care?" A flicker of annoyance crossed the man's face. "That wasn't the plan. He went rogue." He remembered. Jed's gut tightened. Remembered what? The man stepped forward, slow and deliberate. A voice like his, spoken at the wrong time, can undo things. Memories, allegiances, even reality. He's one of the few, what we call an echo. A child born with the ability to carry truth. Dangerous, if allowed to speak unchecked. Ash gripped Jed's coat. Jed could feel the boy trembling again. But this time it wasn't fear. It was defiance. The man continued. "We don't want to hurt him. We want to silence what's inside. To protect people, including you." Jed raised his rifle slightly. "If you want him, you'll have to step over me." The second man, younger, moved his hand slightly, not to reach for a weapon, to reach for something in his coat. A small, leather pouch. He tossed it to Jed. It landed with a thud. Inside, money, dozens of bills, more than Jed had seen in his life, and a folded note in Wade's handwriting. "Jed, if they offer you peace, don't take it. It costs more than you know." Jed stared at it, heart pounding. The lead man smiled. "You think you're protecting him? But you're not. You're keeping him from what he was made for." Jed looked back at Ashdod. The boy met his gaze, and for the first time, without words, Jed understood the answer. Ash didn't want to forget. He wanted to remember everything, even the pain. Jed looked back at the men. You want to take him? You'll need more than money, and you sure as hell better bring more than smooth talk. A long pause, then the man sighed, calmly. We'll return, he said. And when we do, you'll remember this moment differently. With that, they turned, disappeared down the trail. No tracks, no scent, like they'd never been. Jed stood for a long time in the silence after. Hands still on the rifle, Ash moved beside him and placed the brooch gently in Jed's hand, a symbol of something hidden, something chosen that night. They didn't make a fire. They slept cold and close, because when truth walks on two legs and smiles, it's not bullets you need, it's conviction. They rode west into the hills, through a canyon so narrow the sun barely reached the trail. Jed didn't tell Ash where they were going because he wasn't sure she'd still be alive, or if she'd even let them in. Her name was Ruth Alder, widow mid-60s, hair white as ash bark. Folks in town whispered about hers, said she talked to shadows and never slept. They didn't know what she'd survived. Jed did. 15 years ago, her daughter disappeared from her bed. No ransom, no signs of struggle, just a locket left on the pillow, swinging slow in the morning breeze. Ruth said men came to the house at night, men with clean coats, men with voices that made her forget her own name, but she remembered anyway. That's why she was still dangerous. Jed and Ash reached her cabin just before dusk. It sat half buried in the mountainside, surrounded by dry pine and scorched ground. From an old fire that had never spread, Ruth answered before Jed could knock. You finally brought him, she said. Ash stiffened behind Jed. Ruth's eyes were glassy but sharp. She looked right at the boy, then nodded slowly. I wondered if he'd find someone brave enough, she whispered. Turns out it was you, Hallie. Jed took off his hat. You remember me? I remember everyone they tried to erase, she said, and stepped aside. Inside, her cabin was cluttered but warm. Dried herbs hung from the beams. Candles lit the corners. On one shelf sat dozens of small stones, each etched with strange markings, some matching the symbol Ash had drawn. In the dirt, Ruth poured tea. Ash didn't drink, but he sat close to Jed, eyes flicking around like a bird in a cage. They're watching again, Ruth said without looking. I felt it last night. Jed spoke low. What are they, Ruth? She sat across from him, folding her hands. Not men. Not really. They wear the shape of us, but they don't age. They don't forget, and they hate those who do. Jed looked at Ash, and him. He's a memory keeper, she said. A living echo. Children like him are born once in a to hold truth in its purest form. Not opinions, not beliefs. Actual, soul-deep truth. Which is why those men want him silent. If he ever learns to speak fully, not just hum or draw, he could unravel their whole system, like pulling the right thread on a tapestry. Jed rubbed his jaw. And what happens if they catch him? Ruth looked at Ash. They don't kill memory. They seal it, lock it deep, turn it inward, so it eats you from the inside. She paused. That's what happened to my girl. Ash slowly pulled something from his pocket. A broken locket. Ruth stared at it, stunned. Her fingers trembled as she took it. This was hers. Ash nodded, brimming. Jed leaned forward. He remembers her. Ruth whispered. No, he was there. Silence filled the room like smoke. Jed looked at Ash, heart thudding. You knew her. Ash slowly raised his hand, touched his chest, then his head, then drew a line in the air. Path. Jed's voice cracked. You helped her escape. Ash nodded once. Ruth covered her mouth, and then Ash did something neither of them expected. He opened his mouth and spoke. One word, barely a whisper, but clear. Anna. Ruth collapsed into tears. Jed just stared, jaw tight, heart wide open. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Ash had chosen to speak, not because someone forced him, because it was time. Outside, a wind rose, and in the trees beyond Ruth's cabin, something stirred. The coats were coming again, but this time, the truth had a voice, and it had been spoken. Ruth kept the lamps low that night, said it made it harder for them to listen. Jed didn't ask how she knew. At this point, he didn't doubt a word she said. Ash slept near the hearth, curled tight under Ruth's old quilt. His breathing was steady, but his hands still gripped the broken locket. The name he'd spoken, Anna, had shaken Ruth to her core. not just because it was her daughter's name, but because it had come from him. He remembered her, Ruth had whispered. And if he remembered her, that means she lived longer than they told me. Now, as the cabin creaked in the cold wind, Ruth sat beside Jed, her voice no louder than breath. They're coming again, Jed. I can feel it in my teeth. And this time, they won't offer you money. Jed looked at her. Then what? She stared into the fire. They'll offer you forgetting. Not just for Ash, for you. He went quiet. Ruth leaned forward. There's a reason they chose you to cross paths with that boy, and it wasn't chance. Jed frowned. What are you talking about? You don't remember it, do you? She asked gently. What happened to you after Wade disappeared? Jed opened his mouth, then stopped. The trail, the storm, the tree with the strange carving. Wade stepping into the trees, humming that same tune. And then nothing. A hole, a blank dot. Ruth nodded slowly. Reading his silence, they took something from you, Jed. They took the day after Wade vanished. They left the grief, the guilt, the scars, but not the memory. Jed's hands tightened into fists. They used to call you Echo Blood. Ruth said softly. You were tested, marked, but you forgot. Jed stood, pacing, breathing sharp. And Ash, he asked, voice rough. What if they come for him tonight? They will, Ruth said. And when they do, there's only one way to keep him safe. She handed Jed a worn leather-bound book. Inside, every page was covered in symbols, lines, strange phrases, but one word repeated again and again. Anchor. What is this? Jed asked. It's a tether, Ruth said. For memory. A way to hold truth, even when they try to take it. Jed shook his head. But how does that help him? Ruth pointed to the final page. There, written in Wade's handwriting. If they come for the boy, anchor him to something stronger than fear. Anchor him to you. Yet's heart dropped. You're saying, you need to give him your memory, Ruth whispered. The part of you they tried to steal. Give it to him, let him carry it, like he's carried everything else. Jed stepped back, breath shaky. Won't that hurt him? Ruth looked over at Ash, sleeping by the fire. He's already hurting. But this time, he won't be alone. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, slow, unnatural, and with it, 3 shadows moved across the tree line. The coats had returned, but this time, Jed Halley wasn't the same man they'd let forget. He remembered now, and he chose to remember that night. As the coats approached, Jed knelt by Ash and whispered, I don't know if you can carry all of me, son, but I'm gonna try. He took the brooch, the locket, the letter from Wade, and placed them in Ash's hand. Then he pressed his forehead to the boys and let the truth in. The coats didn't knock. They stepped through the tree line like shadows sliding between raindrops, slow and soundless. There were 4 this time. The leader wore the same pristine gray eyes, cold and unreadable, but the man behind him, younger, paler, carried something in his hands, a needle dot and a small vial of swirling black liquid. Jed Halley, the leader, said calmly, You've held the boy long enough. He belongs with us now. Jed stood in the doorway, rifle across his chest, but he didn't raise it. Ash stood behind him, small, silent, holding Yet's locket in one hand and Ruth's book in the other. The man continued, We offered you peace, memory wiped clean, a good life. You declined. Yet's jaw clenched. You took my brother, took my days, took me. You don't get to offer anything. The man didn't flinch. You've already passed the burden to the boy. That alone is an act we could forgive. He looked past Jed to Ash. But if he speaks the wrong word, the wrong name, the consequences ripple far beyond you, beyond this town, even beyond time. Ash stepped forward. He moved slowly, but without fear. His boots crunched softly on the frost. The men stiffened. Careful, Echo. The lead one warned. You don't know what's in you. Ash looked up at Jed. Jed gave him the smallest nod. Ash opened the book, the one filled with truth, memory, and all the things he wasn't supposed to hold, and he spoke. Not a scream, not a shout, just 4 words, soft as falling snow. His name was Wade. The coats froze. The air rippled. Birds burst from the trees in every direction. The wind changed direction. Ruth, watching from the shadows, gasped and dropped to her knees. The youngest man with the vial stumbled backward, clutching his head. The leader's voice turned sharp. You don't know what you're doing, but Ash kept going. He spoke the tune, the memory, the tree, the fire, the name. He died to protect me. I remember now. And so does Jed. Jed dropped to one knee beside the boy, breath shallow, heart full. "I remember," he whispered. "I remember everything." The coats trembled, their forms flickered, faces twitching. One dropped the needle, another turned and ran into the trees, vanishing into mist. The leader stepped back, eyes wide. "You've made a mistake, boy." Ash stared at him. "No," he said clearly. "You did." And with that, he placed the brooch, the bird, with folded wings, into Yet's hand. And Jed smiled, because the wings were open now. By morning, the coats were gone. Ruth lit a candle for her daughter. Jed sat on the porch, Ash leaning against his side, watching the snow melt in quiet drifts. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. His voice was no longer just a secret. It was a choice, and he had chosen to remember. Months passed. Jed rebuilt the back of the cabin with Ash's help. They planted wildflowers where the coats once stood. And in town, folk started remembering things they hadn't in years. Names, faces, the feel of a brother's hug or a mother's lullaby. Some said it was just age catching up. Jed knew better, because one spring morning, Ash stood in front of the quiet church, placed the brooch on the pew, and whispered to no one in particular, "I was never lost. I was just waiting to be found." If someone gave you their memories, their pain, their truth, their heart, would you carry it like your own? And would you speak up when silence felt safer? Tell me below. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need it. And if you've ever felt forgotten, maybe it's time to remember. Thanks for riding this trail with me. I'll see you on the next one.